kind of scary. So this book is about four different groups of people, like a couple of couples and a couple of families. So there are 10 characters total, I think. And what happens is they were all staying at a caravan park, and then they wake up the next morning, and everything except them and their caravans has completely disappeared. Even the topography is different, like everything is just a big flat expanse of grass as far as the eye can see. So that's the setup, and the plot essentially follows them. It takes place in a really short space of time. I think it's just a day, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, what they're gonna do, how are they gonna get back to reality, like where are they? Are they still in the same reality and they've just been kind of somehow dislocated in terms of place? Or are they completely like somewhere different, like a different world, a different universe? Are they dead? Trying to like answer all these questions. So we also get flashbacks as well for these characters. So even though the plot takes place inside a whole day, you do get like a lot of backstory for like really key moments in the characters' lives, particularly like distressing moments or moments where they had like a big impact on them. And then some creepy things start happening, some strange like beings start showing up, which kind of manifest differently to each of the characters depending on their kind of different lives and kind of potentially like guilt and stuff that lives within them. So that's the plot. I enjoyed this book a bit, like quite a bit, but it wasn't outstanding. I found it was the kind of book that when you're reading it, you're really in the moment, you're in the zone, and you don't want to stop reading. But then when you put it down, you can quite easily forget about it, and you're not really drawn to pick it back up that much. It's not like a book where you just can't wait to get back into it, for me anyway. I thought the characterization was really good. All of the characters were like really deep, and you found yourself like changing your opinion as you got to know them a bit better. And they were all quite grey characters. There wasn't any like one really good person. And I think he's the master of creepy children, because there is a child in this who is very, very creepy. But in terms of the fear factor, I wasn't really scared. There were a few moments that I did, actually one moment in particular, I kind of got a bit of chills going on. And I don't think I was reading in a cold place or anything, because I think it was the book that was giving me a little bit of spine tingles, because it did feel so creepy. But then it never really built beyond that for me, as the plot was progressing, and it should have been kind of building up into like more of a crescendo of fear or whatever. It didn't, it just kind of like plateaued, which was a shame. And then I guess the thing that kind of let this book down mostly for me was the ending. So, mini spoiler alert, if you're wanting to pick this book up, I'm not really gonna like specifically say anything, but just a general comment about it. So the ending, for me, everything was completely unresolved at the end, and I'm not someone that dislikes ambiguity. I'm quite happy to have like an open feel to an ending. I think that a lot of those books stick with you. You know, you're really like interested in your own kind of ideas of what might be happening, or like what's going to happen to those series that I've read in that kind of genre. And I just love the writing style of these authors. It really feels to me like you can kind of tell that they love doing what they're doing and that they're having such a great time writing these characters. And you know, they're not trying to be anything that they're not. They just I don't know, they love it, and you can feel that coming off the page. And this series has a lot of really good good versus evil and politic type plotting throughout it, and it gets more and more of that over time, and it's really like, you know, the good guys that you're following, them trying to create the downfall, bring about the downfall of their like nemesis, this horrendous character who you love to hate throughout this series. So I found that this was a little bit chaotic, and so much happens in this book, the final book. It completely went against the kind of pacing that we had throughout the other books in the series, where I swear like a tenth of the stuff that happened in this book could have filled an entire book in the earlier part of the series. So it was like a battle, and then like a side quest, and then another battle, and then like a mission to go and do something, and then another thing and another thing. And yeah, it just ended up being very frenetic, and every part of it didn't like get enough attention maybe as I would have liked. And especially including like the final showdown between the characters and the main rival. I felt like that all was over super quickly compared to the build-up, and I wanted it to be more of a like big finale and to reach more of a crescendo in terms of that. Like it felt a little bit rushed maybe. Having said all that, it was still a really fun read. I just love these characters so much, and some of the relationships in here are just fantastic, so it was really great to see more of those. And there's always like some good spice in these books as well, which was fun. And this book just made me so nostalgic for the earlier books in the series, which were just amazing. So yeah, loved seeing the characters again. Any time that I can spend with these, like people, I know they're not real, but it's just really good. It made me laugh at times. Some of the kind of bantery behaviour was great. It made me feel really emotional. I don't know if I was quite on the like point of crying, but there were definitely some really poignant moments, and yeah, it was just good to see, you know, it all get wrapped up and see what happens in the end. So yeah, I gave this book 5 stars, which is complete rubbish because it's not 5 stars. It's probably more like 3.5, maybe 4 if I'm being generous, but I can't give it any less than 5 because of like all the stuff that's gone before it and the love that I have for these characters and the overall world and the story and everything. So I just decided to be a bit silly and give it 5 stars anyway. And it is really sad that the series is finished because I loved it so much. The third book, book number 3, is a complete step change in terms of style and content and size, and that is The 10th Man. The 10th Man by Graham Greene. So this book looks tiny, right? Well, it's even smaller than that because I think it doesn't even start till there. And then the pages have so much margin and the writing is quite big. So yeah, really tiny successfully managed to get someone to take his place. But because he's given all of his money away in order to save his life, he is destitute, doesn't have anything, doesn't really know what to do with himself, and it basically, just follows what he's doing afterwards, like the decisions that he makes. It was a really interesting setup with some good characters. I don't know if this is like completely mad to say, but to me anyway, it felt like a mixture of kind of like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment with like Shakespeare's kind of madcap, confused identity, mistaken identity thrown in there as well, which was like quite a fun mixture, because the kind of Crime and Punishment aspect of it to me was like the kind of decision that he made, this kind of like raw human kind of emotion and the decisions that he made, and then the kind of regret and like the journey into like spiraling kind of chaos and emotions and stuff afterwards. Then there was also like almost quite a comic thread of misidentity, like I said. So all in all, it was like a very enjoyable, interesting, quite funny at times read. It didn't quite hit me the same way as some of his other books have done, but I still really enjoyed it. I think it could have been a case of really high expectations too, and then it just not having chance to deliver on that in the, very, very short space of not like even 100 pages probably, and very, very small amount of text on each page, so like still good. I think I gave it 4 or 4.5 stars, but I think right now I'd say 4 stars. Okay, book number 4. Book number 4 is The Martian. The Martian. By Andy Weir. This is a book that I got also with The 10th Man, and another one that I'm going to talk about in a big book haul. And when I did that, I talked about the books that I thought I was going to read really soon, and this actually wasn't on the list. But sometimes when I'm trying to decide what to read, I will take a little look at the first sentence or the first couple of lines and see what takes my fancy. And this, I read the first couple of lines and it just says, log entry Sol 6. I'm pretty much fucked. That's my considered opinion. Fucked. And I just thought that was so funny, and obviously like takes you straight into the heart of what's going on. So yeah, I saw that and I was like, okay, I have to read this book now. And it did not disappoint. This book was absolutely fantastic. One of the best books I've read this year, that's for sure. Yeah, I just loved it so much. So I think this is such a famous story, but for anyone that doesn't know, basically there's a guy, an astronaut called Mark, who's on Mars, and the mission that he's part of, they have to leave Mars really quickly, like abort the mission, because there's a big storm, and in the process of evacuating, some stuff goes wrong, and then he ends up getting left behind on the planet in the most inhospitable environment on his own, with no form of communication, and everyone thinking that he's dead basically. So that's where the story picks up. And yeah, basically it's a story of human survival, human resilience, and human ingenuity. And it's such a roller coaster of a ride. So much goes on, like there's so many ups and downs, moments of hope and fear and despair, and yeah, just like certainty that he was going to survive. And I love that because I hate, well, I don't hate, but I enjoy a book so much more if there really feels like an element of threat to it. So I'm not saying whether he does survive or not, but I think it's really good that you get that sense of the jeopardy throughout the whole book. There are other sort of point of views in this book. It isn't just him. Obviously, the majority is him, but you do get to see some different perspectives of the other astronauts that were on the mission, as well as some of the people working at NASA. And I enjoyed that. Like, they definitely shook it up a bit. And I think, again, another sign that this author is really good at storytelling and keeping you interested, and just having a book that kind of ticks all the boxes, in my opinion. So, yeah, really, really good. I 100% give this a 5-star. And if you are into a good survival story, definitely pick it up. I might even watch the film now. See how that compares. The fifth book is actually something I listened to on audio, and that is Absolutely by Joanna Lumley, who is another kind of national treasure. I seem to be going through autobiographies of these like really iconic British celebrities. Yeah, she's best known for playing Patsy in the sitcom Absolutely Fabulous, which is from the 90s, but it's just so good still. I think it's absolutely hilarious, and I really like Joanna Lumley as a person, and she also has an amazing voice, so that's kind of why I picked this up. I just thought it'd be like a fun, quick listen. It was an interesting choice though, because it turns out that the says, in the Tokyo suburbs, 4 women work the draining graveyard shift at a boxed lunch factory. Burdened with chores and heavy debts and isolated from husbands and children, they all secretly dream of a way out of their dead-end lives. A young mother among them finally cracks and strangles her philandering, gambling husband, then confesses her crime to Masako, the closest of her colleagues. For reasons of her own, Masako agrees to assist her friend and seeks the help of the other co-workers to dismember and dispose of the body. So yeah, essentially it's a murder and then a murder cover-up and then a load of stuff that kind of happens after that. This was a totally mad book. It went way beyond what I was expecting it to be, just like a simple crime thrillery thing of like people trying to hide a body, but it ended up being so much more than that. And I really loved it. It almost felt a bit like Breaking Bad to me, in the sense of like things are spiraling out of control. So this, yeah, was very fun but disturbing to read. The characters kind of like in I Am Behind You, you went on a real journey in terms of your feelings about them and kind of getting to know them and seeing them develop and change over time based on all the, kind of macabre, difficult, weird things that are going on around them. To start with, like, all the men in this book, I was like, they're all absolutely horrific, and I was sort of championing the women, but then definitely over time things were like more complicated, and definitely the worst character for me in this was one of the women who cringed, but I loved it. It was also quite funny at times, so despite it being dark and yeah, really disturbing, there were some moments of like real dark humour to it. So I'm going to try and find one of the moments that kind of made me laugh. Okay, so this is when Masako is telling another one of the colleagues that this woman, Yayoi, has murdered her husband. And apologies, I'm probably saying all these names completely wrong. But it says, as she disappeared around the corner, Yoshi whispered urgently, "What's this all about? I won't be able to stand it if you don't tell me." "Just listen and try not to act shocked," Masako said. "Yayoi's killed her husband." Yoshi's mouth hung open for a moment, her chapped lips trembling. "Not act shocked," she whispered at last, which just tickled me. I don't know, just like, you can just imagine that moment of like, oh yeah, don't worry, don't be shocked, and it's like, someone's just killed the husband, and how's this woman supposed to act if not shocked? So yeah, like moments like that scattered throughout that were like very funny. Yeah, I really loved this book. I only finished it a few days ago, right at the end of May actually, and I was so close to giving it 5 stars, but I don't know why, but I can't quite give it 5 stars at the moment. It's definitely a 4.5, but I find